Words in Louisiana, you could convict a person of a felony with 10 out of 12 votes instead of a unanimous 12 out of 12. So I already knew that, but I didn't know the history of the law. I didn't know that it dated back to the post-Reconstruction era in the 1880s after the Civil War, and that it was a part of the Jim Crow era. So once I became aware of the origins of the law and how it was clearly intended to deprive African-American citizens of their right to trial by jury and the full protection of the right to trial by jury, it just burned like a hot coal in my soul that we needed to change this law.
Hopefully the impact would end mass incarceration as we understand it here in Louisiana. And I say that by virtue of the fact that a lot of the folks who are in prison are in prison because of these non-unanimous jury verdicts. This has been a practice that's been around for over 135 years, even to the extent that a professor wrote a book entitled Jim Crow's Last Stand. And it talked about the impact that these non-unanimous jury verdicts had on communities. Not only on the community in the sense of jury verdicts, but it disenfranchised literally hundreds of thousands of African Americans at the time it was put in place. And so we're hoping that as of January 1st this year, when it went into effect, that now these juries have to be unanimous, because nobody should be going to prison for the rest of their life based upon reasonable doubt that one or two people have already expressed.
I felt, knowing that Lewis A. Martinette in the year 1898 had been writing to the Attorney General for the United States asking for help on this particular system, knowing that Booker T. Washington had penned a letter to Louisiana's delegates in 1898, having realized that lawyers had tried unsuccessfully for so many years to challenge this system in the courts, in my mind, to know what I knew and do nothing would almost be an act of irresponsibility. So it was not an option at this point. I felt that I owed it to my elders and my predecessors to confront a system of injustice that had prevailed for too long. And so for me, not only was I instrumental in shaping the research piece of this, but I was also feeling very obligated as a professor at an HBCU, the only one I might add in the state of Louisiana, to train future lawyers who would be activists in the sense of confronting these types of injustices. So this grew from a personal research project to an actual movement that became uncontainable, and I'm very proud to have been a part of it.
When you're dealing with an issue as transformative, for example, as unanimous juries, it's impossible to pass something of that magnitude without having partners on all levels, from the highest levels to the grassroots levels, to build the support necessary to make it happen. Unanimous juries was a constitutional amendment that before the state legislature had to pass the House and Senate with a 2/3 vote, which is a very high bar at any point. Without having national and local groups doing the education of legislators, without creating an issue platform that was broad enough to entice even the most conservative progressive groups to agree, that issue would never have been successful in the legislature. But more importantly, once it passed the legislature, it had to pass the voters. And without having groups manning those grassroots moments, making those phone calls, staying on corners, knocking doors, without engaging our press and having them educate people, the Advocate series on non-unanimous juries in Louisiana, educating the average voter on the horrific pre-Jim Crow, post-Reconstruction origins of that racist, awful law, and making people realize, I mean, when you had the Advocate reporting about how in the 1900 Constitutional Convention, the members were openly talking about how non-unanimous juries would help them lock up more African Americans and keep them from voting. When you pull that Band-Aid off, people will see kind of this horrific wound that Louisiana has. It's hard to look away from that and not fix it. But all those groups in whatever capacity, they were all part of that process. And without all of their help, it wouldn't have been possible.